the greater Boston community that we are all somewhat part of. So today we have the opportunity to hear testimony from someone who went through the horrors of the Holocaust. And it's really important to hear this testimony because, as Elie Wiesel said, that when you listen to a witness, you become a witness yourself. So hopefully we can take what we learn and we can educate those around us, so that in the end, hate will never prevail, and so that we never forget and such atrocities never happen again. So again, it's not always so common that we get the great opportunity to hear from someone who was there, who survived the Holocaust. So just a little bit about Magda. So Magda was born in Czechoslovakia. She went to a Hebrew Zionist elementary school, and she was in 2 separate concentration camps in the Holocaust. She was in Auschwitz and in Bergen-Belsen camp, as she'll talk about. And so since the end of the war, the end of World War II, since 1949, she's been in America in a few different places, which she might tell you about. She has 2 daughters, 6 grandkids, and 2 great-grandchildren, which is amazing. She speaks to schools in Florida, in the Boston area, such as BU, and she's been on the March to the Living 4 times as living testimony. So just a schedule of what's going to happen now is that Magda's going to share a story for around 30 minutes. And then afterwards, we're going to open it up to questions from anyone who may have or want to ask any question about her story. She'd prefer not to talk about politics, but other than that, she's open to any questions you have. And afterwards, Magda said she'd be willing to continue the conversation via email, and she might talk more about that. So Magda, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I am talking to you like I feel like you are right near me, because last time when I was speaking at Boston University, we were at the Hillel building there, and the students were sitting around me in the Hillel building at BU. And so this year, this is not so easy to do. So this is the next best thing, right? So let me tell you a little bit. I used to not like to talk about this subject, and especially after the war, I tried to blend in wherever I was. I didn't want to talk about my past. People heard an accent, but they usually, I would say, just try to minimize that. But it was not easy to keep doing that. I was living in England, in London already after 1946. And while I was in London, I never really spoke about my Holocaust experience. I wanted to blend in. I will tell you about it later. But anyhow, I'll start at the very beginning. I was from the area of Czechoslovakia, which was called Podkarpatska Rus. It was a foothill of the Carpathian Mountains. It was a small town, only 30,000 population, and half of them were Jewish of the population, half of them were Catholics, kind of Catholics like the Russians are, Greek Orthodox kind of Catholics. And the Jews lived, in some areas they were living near each other with the non-Jews, but the very Orthodox Jews lived in a separate area. It wasn't a ghetto, but somehow more, it was primarily religious Jews, Hasidim, with the fur hat, if you know, and the Bekershe, the long black jackets, the men, and the women, of course, all had haircuts, and if they didn't wear a wig, then they would wear a scarf always over their heads. And usually large families. My family was large too. We were 10 children in my family, and I was the 10th child. My parents weren't that religious, They were Orthodox, but not really. My mother didn't cut her hair, and my father's business wasn't functioning on Saturday. But when there was work to be done, he had some people who worked for him who came in Saturday and worked. But the front of the business was always closed. So Saturday was like a real Shabbat. My mother didn't cook for Saturday. Friday was a preparation. And if you all know what chulent is, how many of you know what chulent is? Oh, good. All right. That was like the comfort food today. And my job was, as a little girl, on Friday, I would go with the maid to the bakery where there was a where the challah came out from the oven. The oven was still hot. So everybody who had a big chulent pot, they took it to the bakery. They put it into that oven, which remained hot till the next day. This was the beginning of the slow cookers. They did not invent slow cookers then yet. So by the middle of the next day, Saturday, the chulent was ready, and then my job was with the maid to go and pick it up from the bake place, from the hot oven. I'm just saying that as a sideline because most of my people don't even know what chulent is unless their grandparents were from that area. Pardon me? Did somebody say anything? Okay. Anyhow, let me go back to my life. So when we were first Czechs, Czechoslovakia came into being after the First World War, and it was between the First World War, end of the First World War, to the beginning of the Second World War that Czechoslovakia was a real democracy. People, various minorities could have their own schools and their own language, but the major language was Czech, of course. The part that I was from, this Carpathian area, there were a lot of other ethnic groups, like a lot of gypsies. There were a lot of Russians that were called Lithuanians, a lot of Germans who were called Schwabs. And those were usually the farm community. And the town, as I said, Munkac, was small town. The peasants would come in to bring their farm produce, whether it was potatoes or vegetables or whatever, on market days. There were no big supermarkets. I will just excuse myself for 1 second because somebody's knocking on my door and they don't know that I have a mission to accomplish today. So, okay, just 1 second. Okay, oh, so nice. Thank you, darling. Sorry, it was one of the ladies I usually walk with in the morning, and she decided to bring me something that she cooked. So I know what I'm going to have for dinner tonight. Anyhow, going back, so the area was rather friendly. My father had a tailor shop, a very elegant kind of tailor shop, like Giorgio Armani. The whole area around where we lived, other communities knew about him, and it was all custom made. People did not go to department stores. There were no department stores. There were no supermarkets. There were little tiny supermarkets like neighborhood markets. But most of the life was rather simple. There we did have electricity. People we didn't have cars, horse and buggy kind of a thing to go to the railroad station. People didn't have telephones at home for sure. If somebody had to make a telephone call, would go to the post office or send a telegram, a Western Union or something like that. But yet people were reading books, and even though most people didn't go beyond middle school, if they went to high school already was a big achievement. In my family, my parents were a little bit more advanced in some ways, and they thought that if my brothers, sisters would go to high school, then they can go to the university, the capital of Czechoslovakia, Prague. That's what happened. I went to a Jewish Israeli, not so much Yiddish, but it was Zionist elementary school. So every subject at the elementary school was in Hebrew, whether it was math or science or any other language, even a little bit of English, it was all in Hebrew. And till the age of 9, that's until I was part of living in Czechoslovakia. That was in 1939. So I was born in 1930. By 1939, that part of Czechoslovakia got connected to Hungary. The Hungarians were at the beginning okay, not great lovers of Jews, but before the First World War, Hungary and Austria was part of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. So at my family, my parents spoke Hungarian from way back. So even while we were Czechs, at home we were speak Hungarian. We did not speak Yiddish at home. My grandparents did speak Yiddish, especially I only knew my mother's parents because they lived in my town. My town's name was Munkács in Hungarian. In Czech, they refer to the town Mukačevo. And we lived rather nicely under the Czechs. My father's business had customers from all over the neighboring towns. And there were many Christian lawyers, judges who could afford paying for the kind of coats or suits that he made. Was very proud that he had English fabric to offer, and everything was custom made. When we became Hungarians, all my brothers and sisters who lived in Prague, 5 of them, because I was my oldest brother was 27 years old when I was born, to the same mother, same father. And so some of my siblings I hardly knew, except they used to come home for Passover. But the rest of the time, I really hardly saw them. And the way we communicated, of course, was by mail. Usually people sent postcards or letters. Today, that's not so prevalent. When we became Hungarians, Czechoslovakia, the first part of it was given to appease Hitler, that part of Czechoslovakia, which was called Sudetenland, where most of the residents were of German background. The English Prime Minister, his name was, it skips my mind right now, Chamberlain. He thought he could make peace with and please Hitler, offer Hitler that part of Czechoslovakia. He took that part of Czechoslovakia, but soon after that, he also occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia. So all my siblings who were in Prague studying at university, whatever they were studying, they had to make the big decision where to go from there because they knew they cannot stay in Prague very much longer. They tried to go to England or to come to the United States. You couldn't just buy a ticket and decide you want to travel to these places. You had to have somebody to offer to guarantee that you won't be the burden to the country. Unless somebody had relatives, then it was hard to get this kind of certificates. And they tried very hard to go, but we didn't have relatives in the United States, apparently. Except one of my brothers managed to go to England during this period. And then we never heard of him, or we never heard what happened to him. All through the war, we never knew. One of my sisters who studied, she was almost finished with her medical studies. She wanted to go to England as a nurse or a nanny or a nurse's aide. She didn't get any papers, so she ended up coming back home to Munkaj to be with the family. She ended up volunteering in a hospital locally until we were taken to the camps. The rest of my other brothers came back to my hometown. But as soon as we became Hungarians, the Hungarians were collaborating right away with the Germans and with Italy. And they were fighting, the Hungarians with the Germans in Poland over between Russia and Germany. And the Hungarian Jewish boys were called up into what they call the forced labor. They were not in army uniform, but they were serving under the army. As like in Poland, they put mines down while the fighting went on between Russia and Germany. If they got captured by the Russians, that was really good. That was sure that they would at least survive. And that's what happened to 3 of my brothers. That's how they survived. Of course, we knew very little about this. I knew as a little girl already, 9 years old, my parents were always worried, concerned what happened to the rest of the family. At the beginning, they could exchange postcards, but later on that did not exist anymore. So we were still at home, in our home in Munkaj. I remember my father was really sick. He had even pneumonia, and food was scarce because we couldn't go and buy in the market anymore because the Jews were not allowed to go to the market. We had curfews. We couldn't walk outside after a certain evening time. And we did have a radio, which was a big deal those days, where we could listen to news, except the only news we could listen to was the German propaganda about all their victories. And of course, Hitler just talked about his successes everywhere. And of course, he talked about how he was going to get rid of the Jews forever. That was his biggest worry, about how to get rid of Jews forever. And at the beginning, we did not have to wear a star, but later on, while we were Hungarians, a yellow armband. And as I said, we could only listen to the German propaganda. We were very careful when we somehow were able to, by moving a little thing on the radio that was only allowing the German propaganda. One of my sisters knew how to remove that little seal, and we could listen to BBC or the Voice of America. And one day we were caught listening to those programs. We were very much punished, and our radio was confiscated. My job was, and we still had the radio, my family wanted me to be outside the house and make sure that nobody is listening to us, what we are doing, listening to the news. But we were still at home. We were at home, 5 sisters, I and 4 older sisters. One of my sisters, the oldest, had a little child, a 3-year-old little girl. So they lived with us too. The house was a rather sprawled out, big farm kind of house with a big yard and a big fruit orchard in the back of the house. Most houses were like that. And the fruit orchards were every house sort of were interconnected without too much fence between them. So we were still living at home. I only went to school in the Hebrew elementary school, and during the Hungarians, I had to go to what they called a Jewish girl middle school. So from 5th, 6th, 7th grade, I went to that school. Every subject was taught now in Hungarian, only the Jewish girls. And I wanted to go to the 8th grade. I was able to go yet at the beginning. But by September, things were getting rather difficult. When I say that was in 1944. So the Hungarians occupied my area in March 1944. By the end of 44, I didn't go to school because from March until May, we were still at home. Suddenly, we got an order in end of April that we have to vacate our home and move into one street, which they designated as a ghetto. We had to move in with some other people, whether they were family or strangers, and in very crowded conditions. We had to leave our house that my family lived there forever since they were married. And we did not know for how long we will be in this ghetto and what can we take with us. Nobody had any means of carrying anything, no car, no vehicles, no other transportation. And the young men were already out of the house. They were in the forced labor. So whatever we carried with us, maybe an extra pair of shoes or some clothes, and whatever food we still had with us, and not knowing for how long and what's going to happen to us. At that time, we never heard yet about concentration camps. We never knew that there were such places like Auschwitz. We knew that there was anti-Semitism. That's why we had all these severe laws, but we had no idea what's going to happen to us. After we've been in the ghetto from April till end of May, we got another order to vacate the ghetto. I cannot tell you exactly what transpired in the ghetto because I sort of shut that out of my mind forever. Conditions were terrible, no food, crowded, and there were no young men, only old men, old grandparents, parents, and young women, children. We got the order to vacate the ghetto and start moving. It was end of May, like now here. It was very hot, very humid. I'm trying to silence this.
Hello.
You see, everybody doesn't know that I'm talking today. I couldn't tell anybody not to call me because I did not expect anybody to call me. Anyhow, we were leaving our place in the ghetto and still not knowing where we're going to march to. We were all given the order that 5 persons in a row, there were SS guards, the Hungarian version of them that they called Arrow Cross, were walking along us with their rifles and their German shepherds, and we had to move fast. We did not know where we are going, but it took us about 5 kilometers to march pretty fast to this big open space, which was at the outskirts of my town. And the reason they made us go there, because the place was big and open. It was a brick factory there, and there was nothing there. The only thing that was there in this big open space, it was like 5 football fields so big. There were railroad tracks. And so people who were more knowledgeable than I, they figured it out. There must be a reason why they took us there, because they probably have intentions of taking us to some other place. That big open space, there were nothing. There were bare ground, no soil, nothing to lie down on, just the bare concrete. And of course, no hygiene facilities. There were only lookout towers where the guards could look us and randomly shoot people, trying to scare us from not wanting to make any attempt to escape. Meantime, one would wonder why the neighbors, who were sort of friendly, why did not look out for us or curious what's happening to us. But there was nobody that I remember that cared or looked for us or tried to help, unfortunately. When we finally, well, as we had to march, I remember that one of my grandfathers, he was in his high 80s. He could not walk very well. He fell down, and my mother tried to help him to get up from the ground. And the guard hit my mother with the rifle butt, made her get up and leave her father and my grandfather on the ground, and we had to march on. And that's the last time that I seen my grandfather. There were aunts and uncles also in there in this big group, but I don't remember how close they were near us. But I know my mother was the only one who tried to help her father to get up. Finally, when we arrived to this big open space, as I said, the lookout tower was very actively shooting, so people don't try to escape. We were in this big open space for a few days. They brought us something very minimal food, very little water, very little facility to clean. And then after we saw the cattle cars started to arrive on the railroad tracks. And of course, the cattle cars were there because they had the intention to take us somewhere else. So we were started to load 100 persons to each cattle car. And there were a lot of children, as I said, as we were trying to load onto the cattle cars. I remember one of my teachers from the middle school, a lady, she was a science teacher. She was shot at randomly. She died. They put her body aside, and the rest of us had to get into the cattle cars. They gave us 2 buckets, one for using for water, drinking water, and the other bucket was to use it as a bathroom facility. And then we were locked into these cattle cars, and the cattle cars started to move. The cattle cars were dark, dismal, very little space to sit even on the bottom of the cattle cars. And there were only, as I said, only the older grandparents, mothers, children, and that's it. Each cattle car had a little opening high up for a little air for the cattle or for whatever they were carrying. For us, that was the only way to get a little air, except those little spaces were covered with barbed wire, so people should not make any attempt to try to escape from those little spaces. Being in this cattle cars for a few days was horrible is not the word to describe it. Impossible was a word. Finally, people knew, the older people, that we are heading towards Poland. And finally, when we arrived to the destination, they opened the cattle cars gate doors, those metal things, and bright sunlight came into the cattle cars. And then we were given orders that we have to get up and move fast in different directions. Young women, one direction, mothers and children, second direction, and men, fathers, grandfathers in a third direction. The voice of this order giver was rather friendly. He was wearing boots, shiny boots. He was a high-ranking German officer. Many of you probably heard the name Mengele, Dr. Joseph Mengele. He was a medical doctor. He was a chief doctor in Auschwitz. He was the one who carried out a lot of these horrible experiments on twins without giving them an anesthesia, just creating pain and suffering. We did not know who he was then. His name didn't mean anything to us. But he said to us in sort of a friendly voice, he said, "Don't worry, you're going to see each other soon. Keep moving fast into the direction that they gave the order for us to move, but you're going to see each other soon." I would have usually gone with my mother, because even though I just turned 14, I looked like much younger, and I was very attached to my mother. But I let her hands go because we had to move fast, and I held my other sister's hand. So the sister who had the little child went with my mother, and I stayed with my other 3 sisters. So this is the last time that I saw my mother, my father, my sister with the baby. It never happened that we saw each other again, because as soon as we arrived to Auschwitz, they were sent right to the gas chambers. We, of course, then did not know it. We were hoping that we will see each other again, but there was no chance. As soon as we arrived, those who were not going with the older people, they made us march along the place which was called Auschwitz. Many of you have seen, I'm sure, pictures of Auschwitz, and where the railroad tracks all sort of gathered together. And that was the part of Auschwitz that we were not in. That was a part of Auschwitz where there were brick buildings where they housed the people who were maybe against Hitler's politics, or the Polish dissidents. When they took us, the Hungarian Jews, they took us up to a part of Auschwitz that was called Birkenau. Birkenau was much more an enormous place, only kind of barracks that were made out of wooden logs. And there were forever, wherever you looked, you only saw those barracks. The barracks were like on the streets, only with those barracks. They were divided, separated by a road, a concrete road. There was never any grass or flowers or nothing. There was just concrete and more concrete, and dust and dirt and mud when it was raining. So some of us who arrived, they would be given a number that they were tattooed on the arms. By the time they took us, they were so much in a hurry to get rid of us that they didn't even bother to give us a tattoo. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody who came at the same time we came didn't get the tattoos, but our group did not get it. My sisters didn't get it. I didn't get the tattoo. As soon as we came past that one place, they marched us into a barrack where whatever we were carrying still from home, and everybody had something special that they wanted to hold, carried with so much care, they had to dump into this big heap. The second barrack that we were put to go to, we were going to be shaved, our heads and all the other body parts. This third barrack became the disinfecting shower. We were given to go to have a shower, but it was like not a normal shower. 1,000 women going in at the same time, only to have a tiny bit of water coming from a little thing from the ceiling, not only cold water, no towel, no soap, no nothing to stand on, just go get wet and then exit on the other end of the barrack and pick up from a big heap of clothes somebody else's clothes, no longer what we were wearing, but somebody else's clothes. Whatever we picked up was not clean. It may have had lice in it, all kinds of terrible things. We couldn't select. We just had to take one and put it on, and that was it. And the last barrack that we made to go to was a barrack that became our residence. All the barracks looked the same. I'm sure you all have seen what they looked like. They were enormous, like a big hangar where airplanes are kept. Of course, not as beautiful as an airplane hangar. On both sides inside this barrack were these wooden structures that looked like 3 levels of shelves made of wooden planks. On each level, there were 10 people supposed to lie next to each other, side by side. And there were 1,000 women in each of these barracks. And this was our now place. If we were not lying down on these planks without, of course, blankets or mattress or pillow, none of that existed. We were cold, even though it was summertime. It was June already in Poland, but it was cold at night, and we just huddled together to keep each other warm. Most of the day was spent from early morning, like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, because stars were fully out. We had to line up along one side of the barrack and wait to be counted or selected for something. We never knew what we were being selected for. Sometimes because we looked healthy and they thought we could work. Sometimes because we looked sick and they picked us out of the line. A few times they picked me out of the line because I certainly didn't look like a healthy adult, and they put me into another barrack. And somehow, during the night, we were able to exchange me for somebody else's sister, so that we were the only thing that was worrying us then, just to stay together, the 4 sisters, my 3 sisters and I was so sick. I had typhoid. One of my sisters had ear infection. Nobody could complain to anybody. We didn't want to tell anybody that we could not stand up. I wasn't able to stand. I was leaning on my sisters. My sisters tried to pinch my face and stuff me with some rags to make me look more alive and more robust. But one thing we did not want to do is be separated from each other. My sister had the medical background. She didn't want to volunteer that she had that background because we did not want to be separated. When they were asking for who had medical background, the only reason they were asking people for medical background, not to be of help or work as a medical person, they got the job to put the dead bodies into the crematorium. For that, they needed medical background. Any way that they could insult and make people suffer, they managed to do that. So we were in Auschwitz. We did not work. All we had to do is either stand outside line to be selected or wait. By that time, this was already in summer and then in the fall, and we did not know what was going on in the world. Auschwitz was enormous. There were hundreds of thousands of people were killed every day, either gassed. Whenever we went to have a shower periodically, they called it disinfecting showers. But we did not know whether gas will come out from the above or whether a little water will come up. Every time we went there, that was at the beginning, we did not know that was going to be. But the Russians already were very much beating the Germans back. And the Germans tried to get rid of the population in Auschwitz as fast as they could. They would shoot them, they would kill them, they were gassing them, and every other way, starve them. And what they did to us in my my three sisters and me, they put us into another cattle car and they loaded out this whole train with other people like we were, and they took us to another camp. Other people were sent on death marches. I'm sure you heard about that. And towards the very end of 1944, they managed to empty the whole camp of people, and that's when the Russians occupied Auschwitz, and Auschwitz was liberated. But unfortunately, most of the people were either dead already or dying or on the death marches. We were sent to another camp, which was in Germany, and the name of the camp was Tannenberg. It was a satellite camp of Bergen-Belsen. Bergen-Belsen was also a death camp. People were dying of all kinds of diseases. The worst thing was typhus and typhoid. And it was almost rather late. It was already, they took us there like end of 44, and we were there in the second camp till middle of April 45. The second camp was meant for 500 women to work in an ammunition factory. In the second camp, they asked people what they could do, and my sister did say that she had a medical background, so they made her the camp medical person. They didn't give her any medicine that she could give out, not even an aspirin. The only thing she could do is keep some people out of work if they fell a broken arm or a leg for a couple of days. But anything else, there was no treatment for. And the camp was supervised by people, the officers who were coming regularly from Bergen-Belsen to make sure that she doesn't keep people out of work. She was warned if they find the same person out of work, when they come again, they will take her and that person to Bergen-Belsen. And whoever they took to Bergen-Belsen, because of the sickness, they never came back again to the camp. So the camp started out with 500 young women, but then people got sick. They got diarrhea, dysentery, typhus, and then nobody had any immune system working. So people got sick. They went down and down and down, and that was the end of them. So in a couple of months, before, when we started with 500, ended up only 300 women there. My job was not working in the ammunition factory, but chop up, break with an axle stones to make a road, pavement for a road that was leading to the ammunition factory. My two other sisters were working. One was helping my sister who was doing the medical work to help if somebody fell, to go get the person in. And they didn't have a room. They had a little cubby, like a little tiny space to just keep this person not to go to work. And this camp wasn't, because there were only 500 women to begin with, there were only 3 barracks. And here the barracks, people had like a camp cot, 3 levels, but 1 person on each level. And in this camp, because we were working, they gave us a uniform to wear, the gray and blue striped dress and wooden clogs. Our heads were still shaved, and this was in the middle of the winter. We had to march like 5 miles every day back and forth to the work. And I was working with the axe every day, chopping these stones. My other sister was got a job to work in the kitchen where they were making the SS guards food. And this was good for her because she could eat some food there, she could steal it. And her ration she gave me. So rations were very minimal, but whatever it was, because I had her ration and my ration, it kept me going longer and better. We were in this second camp for a few months. Every night they locked us up. Every night we heard heavy bombers flying above. We were hoping that by then, the Americans and the British were in the war fighting, and they would win, and they would maybe able to liberate us. The SS guards were mostly men, but there were also many women. Most of them were from various other German, from different countries, that there were the German minority, like they were from Poland, who were volunteering as SS guards. They were from Czechoslovakia, from Sudetenland, who came to Germany. They were very eager to help in the Hitler's cause because they believed so much that he's making their world much better. And they were all bought into that. Every night I was just praying that whatever happens to my sisters, that to me should happen together. We did not know what happened to our sisters, brothers. We did not know what happened to our parents. We only could think from one day to another what's happening. The SS guards, when we were working, they said, don't even imagine that you're going to ever be free, because they were practicing how they're going to get rid of us. We were ditching ditches, and they were going to line us up, shoot us, and we would fall dead into the ditches. And that was their solution. The second solution for them was that they would take us all in trucks to Bergen-Belsen if this camp is not going to be around anymore. But by miracle, one night when they locked us up, the SS guards knew that the war was coming to an end soon, and they knew that the British and Americans were pretty close. The guards decided to save their own lives. They escaped and they left the camp unattended. We did not know about that, but the young women, like one of my sisters who was working in the kitchen, they were told by the cook who was a chef for the SS guards. He was a German-Dutch guy, civilian. He told the young women that because it's going to be such a chaos, he's going to throw whatever he has, like raw potatoes or rutabagas, into the middle of the campground. He knew that all the people will be running to get it. He said it will be so chaotic that will be a chance to escape if people want to escape, because the very local nearby residents who lived in the nearby towns and villages, they did not want the British or the Americans, soldiers, to see how we were treated in the camp. So they took it upon themselves, the locals, to take on their own trucks, to come to the camp, load all the camp people, the 300 women, onto their trucks, and by force took them to Bergen-Belsen. A few of the people, my sisters and I, and a few others, managed, while it was all so chaotic, to escape into the nearby woods. The camp was located in an area, was on a hill among evergreen forests. And somehow we managed, in our striped uniform, managed to crawl on the muddy ground because the snow melted and the ground was all muddy, managed to crawl into the nearby woods and managed to go deeper and deeper. So when the local civilians came to look for us, they could not find us. Some of them they did find, they shot them, they dragged them out by force, and everybody was loaded onto the trucks, except a few of us that they could not find. And whoever they took on their trucks to Bergen-Belsen, the 300 women, within a very short time, only a matter of less than a week, those people did not stay alive. The Americans came to this area first, and then the British. The war was still going on till middle of May. Actually, May 8th was the end of the European war. But my sisters and I, in the forest, we got sick. We stayed there for a couple of days. It was all quiet around. We didn't hear too many shootings anymore. And the fires that we saw, we didn't see them anymore burning. We decided to go back to the camp to see if we can find some food, something to eat. We all got sick because we were lying on this muddy grounds in the forest. When we went back to the campground, we didn't find any food. We met some American soldiers. And I remember asking them, what day is it? I knew a little English. They said April 15th. We lost all sense of what day it was. And 2 days later was my 15th birthday. So this is how I was liberated. My sisters and I, we were wearing this striped uniform. After the Americans went on, the British soldiers occupied this part of Germany, and it became the British zone. They helped us. They gave us some food, some cans of Spam, and some chocolate, and I don't know what else. And they gave us some clothes to wear, like the British women army uniforms. That's what I was wearing afterwards. And then they found us a place to live in a German house, where all the Germans said that they had no idea what was going on. There were no German men around. They made all kinds of stories up, and a lot of the British listened to it and believed them, that probably whatever was told to them, they were naive. We knew that all these German men were in the army, probably killing. We got like a couple of rooms in this German house, and then we tried to find out what happened to the rest of our family members. We did not know who remained alive. The only way people could communicate that the American Red Cross and the British Red Cross and the International Red Cross came to Germany. All the people who survived still from the camps, now they became displaced persons. They were still in camps, even though now they were not in real camps, but they were nowhere to go. People had to find what to do. There were different organizations started to come and help. And my brothers, who I mentioned earlier, that were captured by the Russians, they came back with the Russians and liberators already in the summer of 44. We were taken away spring of 44, and they came back to home, not knowing that we were gone in the summer of 44. They went back to our home to look for us. There were other people living there, and those other people lived there, acted like it was their own home. They were not willing to give back the house. There was no law that they had to give it back. So my brothers were given just some old photos of the family. So that's, if I have some old pictures, those are the ones that I have. But they did not have to give back anything, even until today. There was no law that they had to give back anything, not my father's business, not our home where we lived for so many years. My brothers ended up, the three of them went to Prague, tried to find a way to help us, and they found our names on this Red Cross list that we were alive and that we were in Germany. And somehow they managed to get words to us. Remember, those days people did not have telephones and Instagrams and all that. you know, this was all done via long distance mailing. But they found out that we were alive. They somehow got words to us that we should make no effort to try to go home because there is no home to go back to. And of course, we did not find anything out about our parents or my sister with the baby, neither of another sister of mine who remained in Prague. I did not mention her before. She was actually married to somebody who had relatives in the United States, and they thought from Prague they could go to the United States. We never heard what happened to them. Later, after the war, I found out that that sister of mine, she stayed in Prague till 1942. And in 42, she was taken to a camp in Czechoslovakia called Theresienstadt. Some of you may have heard, not far from Prague. And when I was visiting after the war that place, there had big ledgers about all the people because the Germans had very good system of keeping very exact information. It said in this big ledger that I looked at years after the war, it said when she was taken to Theresienstadt and how long was she there. And then from there, she was taken to Poland and on a camp with a group. And it also said that she was part of a group of 1,000 people. And after the war, from those 1,000 people who were taken to Poland, only 19 remained alive, and she was not one of them. If any of you go to Prague ever, or you went to Prague, you know, there's one synagogue that was made into like a museum, and the names of the people are on the wall. And when I visited Prague, I saw her name on the wall who did not survive. When I talk to you about this, it's rather difficult because it's like reliving my past. And I try not to do that every day. The reason that I talk these days, because for so long I didn't want to speak about it, but because now so many things are told that this never happened, that it hasn't been so bad, and people should move on and forget, or this is not true. How would I tell you all this if it didn't happen to me? And there are not many people today who are alive, my age, who can talk about this, or can talk, or who can even, I consider that now it's for me important to tell you, because you are the witnesses that you heard it coming from somebody to whom it did happen. And it's already 3:00. I don't know. I didn't tell you much about the other time. Would you like me to talk some more, or do you want to ask me questions? Can you hear me?
I mean, if you have more to share, I'd like to hear more.
Would you like me to say something? So after we stayed in Germany, we couldn't go anywhere, but somehow one of the British officers, he was probably 40 years old, I don't know, but to me, being 15, he seemed like an old man. He said he would adopt me, but because he had a wife living in England, he had no children. I thought I would go to see where he lives, or where his wife lives, if one of my sisters could come with me. And he gave us papers, so we went to stay with his wife. It was a little village in part of England that's called Somerset. It was very, very nice, but very, very quiet. And the sister who came with me, she's 6 years older. She's the only one who's still alive among all my siblings. She said to me, Magda, this is no place for us here in this village now. If we want to do something for ourselves and with ourselves, we have to go to London and go to school and see what we can do. And we told it to the lady, and she understood. And so we went to London, And my brother, I mentioned, who managed to get to England from Prague, he found out that we were alive too. And so he was looking for us, and he sent us a letter while we were still in Germany to say that he will find us a place if we come to London where we can live in somebody's house. And so we managed to, my sister and I, go to London. We went to night school to learn better English. Although my English improved because I was working in Germany with the British Red Cross and with the UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Organization, I became an interpreter for them. They gave me, I was wearing the women British Army uniform. On my jacket, it said Czechoslovakia, that's where I'm from. And then under it, it said interpreter. And I would go on jeeps with the Red Cross people to the displaced persons camps and act like an interpreter for them, because the British didn't speak any other language. And I knew a little, I picked up some languages while I was in camp, a little Polish, Yiddish, and other languages, and Hungarian and so forth. So I was an interpreter at age 15. And when I was in England, there was no support for us. There was no, we had to work. So we had all kinds of jobs to do, but we went to night school. And I never was speaking about my concentration experiences. And at the beginning, I think I mentioned that's where I came out of the closet, sort of, in England, because I was speaking to a student from Denmark. And he said to me that his grandfather related to him that during the war, all the Jews in Denmark and Europe were dealing in black marketeering, and that they made a lot of money. And I was listening to that, and I said, am I supposed to keep quiet? And I hear that, and I know that's not true. I got up from the chair where I was sitting having coffee with him. I said, this is all a lie. I don't know anybody who was black marketeering during the war among the Jews. And I said, I'm Jewish. That's when I came out, because I couldn't stomach all these negative things already right after the war coming, hearing this about the Jews. So when I was in London, I was able to go to night school, and I was able to get some kind of jobs. I even learned how to become a shorthand typist. And I thought I could become a typist. Those days, that was a profession. That's before you guys know about that. Being shorthand typist. And I remember the job required that I type on this big Olivetti typewriter machines, big lists of names and numbers. And if I made a mistake with one number, I had to erase on hundreds of sheets. You don't know these things. And I thought, I'm only 16, 17. I don't want to do that for the rest of my life. I want to find if I can get into some kind of a school. But of course, the British Army people came back from the war, and they had priority. I was a stateless. I had no right. I had to every month go to a police station to register, to say that I am not that I'm okay, I'm not doing anything wrong. So I was, in a very difficult situation. But finally, I managed to get into an art school in London where I did not have to pay tuition. I had to pass an entrance exam. And then I went as a full-time student in that art school for almost 3 years. I managed to find a place where a Welsh lady, was running a dormitory for college students, for women students. They were paying. I didn't have to pay because I was working. I was helping out, keeping the place clean, and also making breakfast for the 30 women who were paying students. And this nice lady even gave me pocket money and I could live in this dormitory. I thought I really was very lucky that I met people who were helping me like that. In fact, I was applying then to American University to see if I can get a scholarship to come to the United States. And my brother, who I mentioned earlier, he became an architect and he got a job teaching at Cornell, and he came to the United States. But from Cornell, he went to Denver University. And he suggested that if I want to, probably I can get a scholarship to an American university, which I did. And I came to the United States because of that scholarship. And I had no money to spend to pay for a ticket. There was some agency, a Czech British agency, who bought me a ticket on a ship. And they even gave me $50 pocket money. And they also paid for my ticket and bought me a winter coat. And so I was so grateful. I was 19 years old then. And I came to the United States end of November 1949. I was so sick on that ship for the whole 10 days. But when I saw that Statue of Liberty, I still can cry. That statue was speaking to me. You know, Emma Lazarus' poem, you know, give me, you're hungry. That statue was speaking to me. When I arrived to New York, I could kiss the ground. And I stayed in New York for a month. And then I went to Denver University in the beginning of January 1950. I stayed at the university. They paid my tuition, but I had to support myself. In 2 years, I got my Bachelor of Fine Arts. And then I got a job teaching in California, in Long Beach. But I realized I really don't want to teach every subject. If I want to be a teacher, I want to teach only art. So I applied to Columbia University, and I went to Columbia for my master's. The tuition those days was much less than today. It was $1,000 a year tuition for the master's. They gave me a grant for $500, and the other $500 I borrowed from the university that I repaid. And so I became an art teacher. And all that was possible because I was lucky and I stayed healthy and I didn't get into too much trouble. And I knew that I have to take care of myself and work, and I did that. I got married. I have 2 daughters, grown daughters, 6 grandchildren. And I'm very grateful that I am here to talk to you. And thank you for listening to me. I talked a lot. And you see, some of it was difficult for me to talk about. But if you have any questions, and if I can answer, I am here for you. Any questions? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. That was very, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, it must have been very difficult for you to share. So I really appreciate you sharing. It's also very nice to hear how you have like daughters and grandkids and great grandkids now. It's very nice. So what made you, I mean, I guess you already spoke a bit about it, but what made you decide to want to share? Because I know it's very difficult for you.
The reason that who's asking me?
Jesse.
I don't see you. Oh, you is that you? Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. The very reason that I said it's very difficult to talk about this, and a lot of seniors don't even want to talk. My sister, for example, she always said, "Why do I torture myself? Why do I talk about it?" But I feel that there is so many denials and so many people who don't care what happened, and people should know what happened, because that's why Israel is important today, because people didn't have where to go. So many millions were killed, and those who remained alive, even right after the war, when they went back to Poland, they were not welcomed. They were even subjected to more hatred. And that's why Israel was necessary to be a country for the Jews who cannot have any other place to go. Anybody else? Natalie?
I just want to give students a chance. Sorry, I heard someone say.
Pardon me? If anybody has any questions?
One question. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to ask you, what happened to your 3 other sisters from the camp in Germany? Where did they end up?
Well, 2 of them ended, one of them who was studying medicine, she ended up living in Belgium. She didn't go back to finish her medical studies, but she always worked in a hospital, in a hematology department. And then she ended up going to live in Israel.
Oh.
And she married one of her high school friends. They were in high school together, the Hebrew Gymnasium in my hometown, and then ended up in medical school also. And then they reunited after the war in Israel. And the other sister came to the United States from England soon after I came to the United States, the one who's still alive. And the 4th sister, she lived in England, remained in England, got married, but then she ended up coming to the United States, but she's not alive. Out of the 10 sisters and brothers, there's only my sister and I alive still.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story, Magda.
Well, I hope you all have a wonderful life. I would love to hear from you when you are in Boston. You can get my phone number from Natalie. I hope I will be in Boston by July. But this number is my cell number. So if you want to get in touch with me, I'll be happy to talk with you. Thank you for listening.
Magda, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story and being open with us and answering our questions. We really appreciate it. It was really amazing to hear you tell your story. I know it was difficult at times, but thank you so much for coming today. So yeah, if anyone has any more questions, I guess we'll send Magda's phone number and email out. And I believe that's all. So
have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
And
Thank
all
you
the
very
best
much.
to you.
Thank
All the
you,
best.
so much for
Thank
sharing.
you. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Simon, for facilitating.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very
So
much.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.